My name is Ken Waddell, publisher of Parcel Media. I will be your moderator for today. We're glad that you could take some time out of your busy schedule to attend. Before we get started, just a couple things. One, I want to make sure to extend a special thank you to our webinar sponsors, Link Supply Chains and Life in Balance. And I do need to take a quick moment to let you know if you have any questions, you can submit them at any time during the presentation. Simply submit the questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Our speakers will be getting to as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Wade Wickus, CEO of Link Supply Chains and host of the new podcast, Supply Chains, The Secret Sauce. So let's get started. Wade.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. It's going to be an exciting course today. You know, when we talk about metrics and financials, it's always exciting. So I'm going to try to make it as exciting as possible. Our agenda looks a lot like this. We're going to talk first about supply chain in general and leveraging working capital, which really comes down to balancing supply chain as best as we can. And then what are the key metrics in the supply chain? So just kind of briefly talking about some of the general metrics in the supply chain that are helpful. And then going over our formula, supply chain total cost to serve. And then talking about what to do with this formula next. And then a little bit about the secret sauce of engagement and empowerment and how that could help implementing this process. So that's our agenda for today. And let's get right into it. All right, so the first slide we have here is a typical triangle showing the supply chain harmony, which lies in the balance of service, cash or working capital, and costs. All those things are necessary for supply chain to be successful. And that triangle is a very common infographic as it relates to supply chains. Going down to the bottom circle, as Elon Musk of great innovator said, the supply chain stuff is really tricky. And at Tesla, I imagine it's super tricky. But it's tricky all over the world. And so in supply chains, when we think about supply chain harmony and balance, I bucket it to these different things on the right side with the check marks. So inbound and outbound balance. And really that's the inbound products, whatever you're selling, matching the demand of the outbound. Oftentimes it's not a perfect match. We're bringing a little bit more in than we're selling, hopefully. And that means that we've got a lot of growth. But then there are downturns where we're bringing in less inventory. And all that relates to the S&OP process. So sales and operating plans are very important to a successful business. And just mirroring all that marketing effort, putting together the sales and demand planning teams and production, inventory and risk and all that sort of stuff, putting it into one package is an amazing accomplishment if companies can take that on. Service and spend. So every bit of service costs a little bit extra. If you have 100% service level, you're really spending a little bit more to get that. And so it's really deciding what that value is, because you do have some unprofitable SKUs that does it make sense to spend that money to have 100% service on those unprofitable SKUs. And when I talk about unprofitable, it's more along the lines of it costs a lot more to move that SKU than it does to provide 100% service. It's kind of like a penny, right? You know, a penny costs 2 cents to make. A nickel costs 8 cents to make, but we still need the penny and we still need the nickel. Pricing and operating costs. So pricing, when we talk about pricing, we talk about sometimes we can offer special bargains or deals that really detract margins, but our operating costs stay the same or have to increase if sales are increasing. So it's really understanding your pricing structure as it relates to demand and movement through your supply chain and profitability. So again, these are all balance and harmony things in the supply chain. And then there's new and current customers. And that's really your sustainability of your supply chain, knowing what new customers are coming, preparing for that in your supply chain, or what current customers you're losing, either because they're unprofitable or they've decided to move somewhere to a different company. All that is really helping your supply chain stay in balance when you are connected to that. And again, that kind of rolls up to the S&OP. Logistics optimization. So making sure your routing is optimized inbound and outbound, and really the outbound is a very expensive piece depending about how many customers and stops you have. So really that drives a lot of efficiency in the supply chain. And then inventory safety stock, making sure that that's balanced, that you have safety stock on your high profit items, the ones that are moving fast, or whatever makes sense for your business model. That's all about managing risk in your safety stock. And then the last one is SKU, life cycle balance. So you've got new SKUs that you want to bring in, you've got old SKUs you got to get rid of. Maybe you've got some SKUs that are unprofitable, like the United States and the penny and the nickel. Sometimes you got to get rid of them. Sometimes you got to keep it for special customers or a special purpose. So it's just understanding that SKU life cycle. So really, again, those are the primary things that I think about as we look at projects relating to metrics and the total cost to serve in the supply chain. So the next slide, we're going to go into key metrics. And really, there's a definition of key metrics on the screen there, but to me, it really shows what matters most. If you've got your metrics in your supply chain, it's really supposed to tell you the picture of what's most important right now. And to develop those metrics, there are a whole bunch of metrics over a wide variety of supply chains and business models. So the ones that I just want to point out here, because you need to have balance with a total cost to serve supply chain metric. You can't just have one metric that drives your whole organization. We think about, you need some kind of inventory metric, you need a working capital metric, you need something about operations efficiency, and then where we're focused today on the transactional cost management. And that's where really we're functioning in today with this master class. But in general, on the inventory side, days of sales on hand, very nice metric. It can tell you how many days of inventory you have on hand. And that's really good to know, especially if your demand is increasing or decreasing seasonally. Profit by SKU is also another fun metric to have in your inventory area. That can really help understand your cost per SKU and your profit margins that you're gaining per SKU. And then going into working capital, obviously your throughput and asset utilization are pretty common metrics there. And then on the operations efficiency side, breaking down your total costs as a unit or a per case is really a great functional metric to understand and leverage, to understand your leverage of your supply chain. When sales are increasing, does it cost more to take on those increased sales, or are you able to leverage what you already have in place and keep your cost per case pretty much the same as sales increase or less? And then your profit percentage to sales. So all those can be skewed by sales increases. Your cost should come down per case, and your percent of sales should come down per case, per profit. But that's why you have to have that balance in metrics. That's why you have to look at not just one, but many different things to understand what's going on. But again, our focus on this session is total supply chain cost to serve, and we'll get into that one, obviously, after this slide. And in the bottom right, I found this on the internet, Alexander Proudfoot. Just a nice little way here to look at where to focus opportunity in supply chain. And on this slide, it really shows about cash flow and trying to manage, working capital via network design. So here they're saying up to 20% of distribution costs can be affected by how you design your network. Reducing inventory is another common area of point to look at, metric-wise. And then reduce days on hand, improve truck utilization, and lower inventory carrying costs. So I thought that was a really nice infographic to share with everybody on the call today. And we'll head over to the next slide, which is the formula. So here we are with our formula. Now, I imagine a lot of folks have heard about, cost of ownership or your total cost. And typically that includes all the costs in the organization, which may include, sales, marketing, all those sort of costs. And that's a great metric as well. And then, there's the general metric of cost to serve, which may not be the same as this one. It may include other costs. When I think about supply chain total cost to serve, I'm thinking about all the transactional items that occur after a sale is made. So when we think about supply chain, it's how much cost occurs after that sales process. So in looking at that, we have all inbound costs that need to be covered that need to come in order to cover that sales transaction, and then all costs to procure, and then all stationary or holding costs, and then all outbound costs. And if you do segregate your reverse logistics or your returns, you would add another column that would say plus all reverse logistics costs. And all that would equal our total supply chain costs. In this picture, I just included the reverse logistics and all the other areas as an example. But if a company does break that out, you can also break that out. So inbound, procurement, holding, and outbound costs, and reverse logistics, which is mixed up in all that. So as we dig into that a little bit more, what we're seeing is on the inbound costs, we're thinking about all our logistics for picking it up from a supply point, all of our products, bringing it into a DC, whether that's a master distribution location or a distribution center, and then receiving that product, putting it away. When you think about safety, I have a little star next to safety because safety can be spread out throughout many areas in your supply chain. I just put it on the inbound, but it certainly can be in the outbound as well, and in the holding costs. It all depends on what's best for your organization. And then, of course, all full-time employees are in this segment as well that relate to inbound costs and any inbound technology. That could be a WMS, could be any other technology that you're using on the inbound side. It could be equipment. There's a lot of things that vary by company. So again, this is just a high-level overview of this metric. Next, all cost to procure. So that includes all your buying staff or personnel. So the full-time employees relating to buying, category management, managing that whole buying process. And then there's inventory variance. So any kind of shrink, damage, or pricing variance, depending again how your company looks at that, that would be a nice place to put that one as well. And then your inventory costs. Now, as you look at this metric, there's a certain time frame that you want to do this metric. So if you're doing it on a period basis and you're comparing it to total cases and or as a percent of sales, you want to make sure your inventory costs are aligned with that as well. So you don't have a variable relating to that. And then demand technology. So any kind of demand system that you're using to make that purchasing. Next, we go into holding costs. So in holding costs, we're talking about any storage or network needs in terms of where you're storing this product. So it's where product is stationary. And then all the facilities surrounding that, security, maintenance, technology related to that stationary cost. And then on the outbound side is really a big bucket because you're talking about either outbound delivery direct to customers, which could be many stops, or you're talking to stores or different channels nowadays, an omni-channel process. So there could be a lot of costs on this side. Any assets related to that last mile, any outbound technology, ELD routing, whatever you got in that bucket. And then that all adds up to your total supply chain costs. So really that's the essence of the formula for this metric. And the thing that this gives you is really some nice view of where to put your capital investment strategy as it relates to transactional costs. It gives you great visibility to all your costs, and you're able to trend this. Most companies are tracking these sort of costs. Maybe not all, but I think the majority are tracked and are put on some kind of a weekly or monthly metric already by the CFO. So it's not too complicated, but it's super important. And then relating it to sales or margin or total cases that you're moving throughout the supply chain really gives it that relativity. So that is the formula. And we're going to continue on here to what do you do with it?
Actually, Wade, one
Yeah,
quick question on
sure.
that. I
Yeah.
did get sent directly to me here. I mean, that's a lot of information, all the costs, like you said, probably available, but it was, how long does it take to put all this together? I mean, I think that's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And certainly the larger the organization may be more complex, but in general, if you sit down with your CFO and really go over all these different buckets, it's really just finding the place on your weekly report or your financials where all this information lies. And in 30 days, you could put together a high level understanding of where your total supply chain transactional costs are. So I really think that in 30 days, if you sit down with your CFO and if you all have enough time, it can be done in 30 days. But yeah, I'd say 30 to 60 days.
Okay. Thanks, Wade. Again, I thought it was good timing to bring that up.
Yeah, great question. Now, what do you do with a formula? So, you've got like many things, this great idea and the great formula, and then what can you do with it? So, one thing to do is you want to surround it with other metrics. So you don't want to have any knee-jerk reactions to this one metric, but you want to be able to take a deep dive and prioritize and fix things. So we're going to go to the right side with the airplane. And the first thing this metric will help you understand is where to leverage your working capital, where you are leveraged and where you aren't leveraged. So as sales grow or decline, and as you trend this over time, you'll be able to see that you're either leveraged or deleveraged in what you're doing in your processes and your workflows, or you have additional opportunity. You can also measure, if you're adding in technology, if that technology affects your cost per case or your cost as a percent of sales. So that's a great thing about this metric as well. And then data diving. So once you do build this metric on a high level, it's really important to understand where to dive in and prioritize and fix issues, because this will definitely bring up some areas of opportunity. And it's great. And when you go into the areas of opportunity, you always want to go in with not gunslinging, but more about how can we work together to figure out how to reduce costs or make this more efficient. And as a standard is always nice too. So you can benchmark this with other parts of your organization. So at Cisco, as an example, they had a report which benchmarked multiple DCs based on this kind of metric in different categories. And then there were awards given to um, companies that had success in achieving certain metrics. They didn't have this metric specifically, but that could still be done with this metric as well. And then tracking trends consistently. So being able to see where seasonality may affect certain trends and how you're doing year over year in that same sort of seasonality, or if the seasonality moves off a little bit. It's just a better way to manage your total overall transactional costs. So that is some of the things that you could do with this formula. Now, it's your supply chain. So there's a lot of things that are specific to your business. This is just a high level 30-minute overview of what this metric is and a little bit about what it can do. We've seen it really take companies from point A to point B. So that's the great thing about it. But what should you be working on now? And that really comes down to taking this metric and building up an engagement plan and an empowerment plan. Because once this metric gets put into place, you have to have a way to have people engage with it and build empowerment so that it becomes a continuous improvement method. And so the first step is on the engagement side is taking this metric, applying it to your business model and saying to all the leadership and or team members, how can we apply this to our business model? What are areas in these buckets that make the most sense or have the most cost impact that would really drive this metric? And then you begin to get unity and trust and clarity because you're talking to everybody about the same metric, the same formula, and really building one that makes sense for your business model. And that goes into communicating effectively. And when I say effectively, it's with some continuous and consistent communication, but also having a listening aspect and really asking people, maybe what do you do that affects this metric, or what do you do as a team that affects this metric, or and listening to what the response is. And really that's the effective part, because the more you can spend time listening, the more you'll hear about the opportunities that exist to get some great improvement. And then continuous improvement will develop as people get engaged with this metric, and they'll figure out ways to reduce their cost per case or their cost as a percent of sales, and just celebrating all those wonderful things on the engagement side. And that's always a fun thing to do as we look at annual goal setting or biannual goal setting, whatever you do. This will really become a great part of it. And then on the empowerment side, really you want to develop this into a quick transformation process. So if somebody sees something that could effectively create an incredible amount of leveraging in your working capital, you don't want to wait on that. You don't want a process that's so slow and bogged down with approvals that it takes forever to get that change made. So it's really coming up with the right process of how transformation can happen. Now, there are some things that you have to go through an ownership process where people need to sign off on it. But there are quick things that you can segregate and say, hey, if it meets this, we want to go down a quick path. And if it meets this, we want to go down a different path. So the other is ownership process. It's important to understand who owns what and make sure there's clarity with that ownership. And that will also help on your engagement side too. And then celebrating the wins and the teams, like I mentioned earlier, will help to build empowerment. And if you want any more information about this, or how to build those continuous improvement and ownership processes, please get with Rain Kansman at getlifeinbalance.com, and he can help you in building this out. So I just wanted to share that very important part of putting any metric into place. And then the last thing, or almost last thing, is how to get started. So yeah, you've got this great idea, and or you're bringing this to a company as a consultant, or whatever your role is. And how do you get this started? Well, first is the CFO. Getting buy-in, understanding the assumptions of the company, the goals, the outcomes that the company wants to see happen are very important. So getting with your CFO is number one. Number two, don't try and reinvent the wheel. That's where a lot of organizations fall apart on things like this. It's hard, but you have the wheel and you have financial reporting. It's just a matter of getting the buckets lined up, and the CFO can help you do that. And then add in or build what you need, and make sure that you and the CFO are working together to understand the importance of building only what you need. So those are items or triggers that really are impactful to your working capital and or your costs, or whatever that criteria is, because you don't want to be building a monster of a metric without really identifying, do you really need this? What will this tell us about our business? And then the fourth thing is presenting it to the CEO. The CEO has to be the person that stands behind it, whoever that is, to make sure that the CFO, the CEO, the chairman, president, whatever, the COO, whatever that right person is, that they are fully behind it. And then develop engagement and empowerment process. So after all that, it's really important to sit down and work with HR or whoever the right person is in your organization about what the right processes are to build engagement and empowerment, so that when you do kick off the metric, it is highly engageable and highly understood, and really affects your business. And of course, don't forget, if you need any help along the way, we are here to help. Just call. Glad to help in any way that we can. If you want us to help implement this, certainly we can help do that. But if you have any questions about it, this isn't a one and done master class. Please feel free to reach out and call us, and we'll be glad to help you in any way we can to get this going, because it's just a great thing. And the last thing I guess I'd want to mention is our next master class, and then the last one in the series, which is on November 18th, and that is demystifying product information management. What is product information management? There's a lot of acronyms out there: PXM, DAM, BIM, or PIM. So we really want to really demystify that, and that's at 2 p.m. on November 18th. And please let others know that if you feel that they would get benefit from it, at our link that you have on the slide here. And then we will be sending this out in terms of a video with a link to all those that attended. And that is the last slide that I have. And thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Wade. We did get a couple questions in. One applies back when you were going over that formula. I know you had touched on a couple of points, but if you could, what would you say would be one or two the most effective ways that you could use that formula?
Well, I would say, one or two most effective ways that you could use the formula. Yeah, like I mentioned before, is really taking it and building it out so that when your strategy comes in for future year planning or whatever your profit planning strategy looks like, really it's a great strategy item. So once you have the metric, it will tell you exactly where you need to focus your capital investments in the future. It'll help you to see and understand where your working capital could be leveraged differently. So I think it really helps with your strategy, and I think it really helps in your day-to-day operational efficiency.
Okay, thanks, Wade.
Yep.
One of the last question we had was, again, that formula definitely raised the questions here. When you're looking at your teams, how do you explain the formula? Obviously, different teams, different way of talking to them. How do you explain it so they can all follow it?
Yeah, and that, that's a great point. You really got to break it into your terms. So each industry has their own terms and their own way of understanding things. So I think that's the important thing. I do believe a lot of folks will understand, inbound, outbound, and procurement and all that sort of stuff on a high level. So really the important thing is to talk to people about their role and where their role lies in the formula so that they know which bucket they're in, and that the whole team in the supply chain is represented by that formula. So everybody has input, everybody's a part of it. Everybody feels like they understand and are part of that formula. And listening, so effective communication, just sitting down and listening to folks, making sure that everybody understands. I think, in some companies, it's down to every level. So whether you're a janitor or whether you're on a line, just making sure that everybody really understands their part and the importance of the metric or whatever metrics you are relating to.
Okay. Well, and again, that was our last question. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Wade. Lots of great information there. Again, I know Wade had made some notes regarding the upcoming masterclass, but you can always email for more information on the content today at info@linksupplychains.com. Wade had mentioned that we'll be reposting this webinar up in the near future here. And before we do go, though, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Link Supply Chains and Life in Balance, for making this webinar completely complimentary for everyone. And of course, thank you to everyone attending today. Appreciate you taking the time out. Have a great rest of the week. Take care.